Seven Habits of Successful Architects, with a nod of thanks to Stephen R. Covey for coming up with the idea. What's an architect? Brooks has this quote that I think has shaped how architects think about themselves, and I think correctly so. When I was just starting out, I asked what an architect did. My boss said the job was to say what would not be. And you can think of that as the same job as a sculptor. But we have to consider more things than just being the knight that says knee. We have to be considering of the behavior of the entire system, especially the non-functional requirements. We have to understand how to make our system durable, scalable, maintainable, all the things that are desirable in a good project. And we should make decisions about what components or parts of the system there will be. And we should do it in conjunction with the team, right? At the end of the day, we're probably going to be held responsible for any of the choices. So that gives us a modicum of authority. But we'll make better decisions if we're open to input from others. More about that later. So here are the 7 habits. Let's dig right in. Know what your job is. And I think the corollary to that is know what it isn't. So as an architect, you need to understand the business problem fully and be able to communicate the solution to that business problem in a series of high-level and low-level technical requirements and designs. You need to understand that even though there's an infinite possibility of tools and programming languages and technologies, you have to know what the customer can support. And you have to put aside your own personal biases about liking or not liking things and make pretty cold-hearted decisions about what to change and what to leave. And always be driving for the simplest thing possible. And to be flexible about reevaluating that. You're the only person on the project that's going to have that 10,000 foot, 5,000 foot view of the entire project. The rest of the technical team members are, to one degree or another, going to be down in the weeds. So you have to stay above it and look down upon a system and say, is this leading to producing the solution to the business problem that we were given? In other words, keep your eyes on the prize. It's okay to have an opinion. In fact, it's your job to have one, but you need to be able to back it up with facts. And you have to avoid predestination paradox. In other words, well, we've always done it this way, so this is how we should solve this problem now. I'm not saying that reusing things that have worked well for you as a solution is a bad thing. I'm saying before you make the decision, you need to question whether or not there's an evolution, that there's a way you could have done it better. And the only way to do that is to keep up with what's happening in technology. So this is what's going to allow you to shape the project. And in so doing, you have one and only one goal: to deliver business value to production that solves the problem you were given. That's your job. Don't be this guy. Don't be a bro architect, right? All the best architects that I know, that I have reverence for, the Anders Heilsberg and the people who designed the .NET framework, and the astounding intelligence that went into designing Linux and refining it over the years, and all of the really great things like the query optimization engine and SQL Server, or a lot of the high availability things, or even the internet itself. If you talk or listen to those people, they're very humble about, they had a great idea and then they proved it out, right? Great architects have execution. Paper architects have ideas and suspenders. Don't be that person. So you can't know everything. You just can't. When I first started my career, it was already too late to know everything. And I started on Fortran 4 and punch cards. And really, to some degree, I started with a soldering iron and some components. But it was already too late to know everything. It's just not humanly possible. But knowing something and being able to find out everything are two different sets of skills. Knowing everything is really hard. Being able to be a good researcher, to be diligent, to be thorough, to be logical, to be able to use the research tools at your disposal, especially search engines, and to be able to have critical thinking so that when you're looking at something, you go, is this real or maybe not so real? And really great architects have astounding peers. I'm not saying they're all at the same level, but the strength increasingly in building great software is a really small group of people who are totally focused on the goal and are willing to be flexible, to experiment, to argue out things on the whiteboard, and to try to constantly be improving. And, so when you have that mentality, you're going to produce better products. And part of that is, if you have a primary or even a couple of primary vendors, don't be afraid to leverage them. They made the product. They probably know it better than you. I've done a lot of my career on Microsoft, and while my experiences have been sometimes hot and cold, I almost never regret going to them and saying, what's the best practice for this or that? And I think you'll be surprised how eagerly they are to tell you, to share their experiences with that they've had with other customers and the things that they've learned. Remember, they're architects and developers too. They're learning things as they go along. And when in doubt, write some code and experiment, right? Try things out. A lot of the things I've learned that I've tried to pass on are things I learned by just going heads down and banging on a problem from all different directions until I had a couple of strategies that looked like that they might have some traction. This is one of my favorite quotes from Aaron Sorkin. I don't know if this is his quote originally, but, if you're a dumb person, surround yourself with smart people. If you're a smart person, surround yourself with other smart people who disagree with you. And that give and take, that push and pull, that tension is what makes great creative works possible, right? An inspiration for an idea, validated and argued out, can produce, in a small enough team, something that's really great out the other end. Now, there's a diminishing returns thing here, right? The more people you add, the more that a horse starts to look like a camel. And so, you have to be willing to have a constructive dialogue, but you also have to be willing to make the decision, own the responsibility, and move forward when the amount of research time that you have has been allocated and spent. Which brings me to research, right? You just have to be out ahead of your teams. All the good architects I know read constantly and are active learners. Like, they're always like knocking out a little piece of code. There's this guy, Mads Christensen, who works for Microsoft, and he is prolific. And now that he's leading a team, his team is prolific because they knock out little add-ons to Visual Studio, or they knock out new features for this, that, and the other thing. And they refine and they refine and they refine, and they're not afraid to iterate. And I admire people like that because they're always striving to do something, but they're actively learning, right? They put something out, they get some feedback about it. They go, oh, that's really great idea. Let's do that. And then they refine, right? Be that person. Know the best practices for your platforms, operating systems, programming languages, and know what's baked and what's not so baked. You know, there used to be this thing I had about taking version 1 from vendors. I just, you know, but these days, version 1 maybe isn't so scary. Maybe they've done 7 betas and 20 RCs and gotten feedback from the community. And version 1 really is that stabilized first set of ideas that is production ready. And then, you know, you've got to learn to, as an architect, give people the bullets, right? You do all this research and your heart is full and you want to share everything with everybody. But you need to be able to give the bullets and then let people drill down. Yeah, even though you may very well want to either A, crawl into a quiet room with caffeine and write a big research paper, or B, get up on a soapbox, depending on your temperament, and tell everybody everything until they slide into a coma. Part of being a good architect is to tune your communication to your audience and to be able to convey your research, insights, and decisions crisply. Be wary of all things cool. This is arguably the coolest picture ever. Great white shark with a velociraptor and an RPG. But cool though it is, the only thing that's really cool is delivering projects that satisfy your customers on time and on budget to production. And that to production part is probably the most important part of your job. Things that don't end in things going to production, especially if there's a big time investment other than yourself, you should feel bad about. Because either you're working for an organization that's so dysfunctional you can never put things into production, in which case your resume should be spewing off the laser printer, or you weren't able to steer your project team to success. And those are both bad. So be afraid of cool, be wary of cool, and embrace the we know we can deliver mentality. Make examples in demos. You know, developers think in code. Source control is cheap. It used to be a huge pain to get, you know, source control provision. But, you know, there's GitHub and Bitbucket and you know, Git just works right out of the box, right? You don't even need a central hub. It's nice. It's, you know, for a project with more than one person on it, I strongly recommend it. I use GitHub constantly myself. But, you know, make examples and demos. Do vertical slices through the architecture to show people the patterns and practices and, you know, where we're going to have logging and how we're going to do error handling and, you know, what the processing flow is going to look like and what units of work look like. And then liberally document that using whatever the platform appropriate thing is, you know. Markdown has become really popular. I like it a lot, but I also use XML code comments in my C# or SQL comments in my SQL T-SQL code. So the best way to communicate with developers is to give them some code backed up by some documentation that explains why. And, you know, write documents. And I'm not talking about getting all ruppy, right? I mean, for its time, RUP was a good thing. It's not anymore. It's not considered to be agilist. You know, it is a little Luddite, but there is a place, a tipping point between having no documents and spending the entire project producing nothing else but documents, which somebody once coined agile fall. And I like to think of as agile fail. And so, you know, the granularity of documentation, whether it's in the code, in READMEs, in a wiki or a OneNote or whatever, and having that documentation be alive is really important, right? Balancing the time that you spend writing and reviewing code and looking at tests and considering non-functional requirements and talking to the security and the networking folks and the operations folks and understanding what the maintenance plan is and all that other stuff. You can add some value, but don't write documents no one's going to read and will be obsolete a month after you write them. Your documents should live ideally as close to your code as they possibly can. Be a person other people want to come to. Be the, hi, how can I help you person, right? I've seen projects where the nominal architect is dreaded by the rest of the team. They just can't stand to talk to them. Because instead of being, hey, let's see if we can figure this out, it's, I am the architect, right? Get all bro coder on them. And that's just, be the person people want to come to, not because you're so much smarter than them, because in your role, you have the freedom to maybe dig into something and research, or maybe you have some experience that would be useful to them, or just because you show a willingness to be helpful. Be helpful. And standards are there for a reason, and dev leads are the primary enforcers of shop standards. But as the architect, you are ultimately responsible for the technical delivery of the project to production. So you have to keep an eye on the actual code. I had this insane conversation with an architect at a big company. And I said, how often do you look at the code for the product you're building? And he said, well, I came on for about a month or so and kind of set out everything. And then, I went on to something else. And I went, wait. In the modern, fast-moving development environment, that is not waterfall, right? Because waterfall doesn't work. You have to be in touch with the code all the way through to production and beyond. And you have to be able to look at what's being done and go, we're having some bugs. We're not getting velocity. We're not, something is not right. And be the person that helps figure out how we could do that better, even if it means calling a huddle, raising your hand and going, okay, so I thought this was going to be a good idea, and I did some tests, and it looked pretty good, but it transpires when we really started to do it that it's way too awful, and we're going to switch gears and do this other thing, right? Don't be afraid to do that if you have to, but the only way to know that is to keep an eye on the code and be at the demos and be engaged, right? Be the force for change you want to see in the world by being in the world of the project and not just of it. You don't live in an ivory tower. You are not above jumping in and coding when there's work that needs doing or problems that need solving. Be in, not of. And lastly, lead by example, right? If you interact with team members with civility and dignity and courtesy, and all the code that they see you kind of knock out follows the shop standard and the documentation standard and best practices, and they see that you care about craftsmanship. If you do it, they'll do it. And I can't emphasize how important that is. You get not just managerial authority, but moral authority by being the best person and the best craftsman that you can be.